Are Brits too reliant on sickness benefits? 0207 862 2222. I'm taking your calls on this right away. New figures show the number of working age people claiming health benefits has gone through the roof by almost 40% in just 4 years. And this means almost 4 million people were signed up for benefits in England and Wales between 2023 and 2024. And in particular, there's an increase in claims by young people and a rapid rise in mental health-related claims. Some people say it's a sign of inequality's gap widening in the UK, but others say the state is simply dishing out benefits too readily. What do you think? Maybe you're on benefits yourself, as I said, and if you are, we'd love to hear from you. 0207 862 2222. That is the number. Well, let's get stuck into this, Matt, because what's amazing about this is the sheer number and also the sheer rapidity of this absolutely extraordinary increase of 40%. So why should people be sicker and less able to work suddenly than they were before? What's happened?
I'm not an expert on mental health, although I've struggled with my own mental health, particularly during the pandemic, and I needed to sort that out quite urgently and managed to. It seems to me, though, quite obviously that there is some hangover from the pandemic. Now, is this a problem? The sheer scale of people who are off work? Of course it's a problem, because we want to have a productive workforce. If you don't have enough people in work, the economy can't grow to the extent that it might otherwise. And also, as you say, the state is having to pay out in benefits. So it's a lose-lose. Apart from anything else, I think the vast majority of people would prefer to be in work. But the question then is, what do you do about it? And what the government has pledged to do is to increase spending on mental health in the NHS so that we can encourage people and get people fit to be back in the workplace. You can't simply say to someone who is struggling with their mental health, we're just going to boot you back into the workplace, or we're going to deny you benefits so you starve. That's not how it works in a civilised society.
But let me ask you, the word COVID has become a kind of badge and a watchword and a catchphrase for so many things. Post-COVID, this is wrong, and this is wrong. Why would you say, having struggled yourself in this department, that COVID has contributed to, or indeed created, this avalanche of mental health problems? What did it do? Why didn't people then recover when COVID ended, or at least the epidemic ended?
Well, this assumes that my hypothesis is correct, or partially correct, that there is a hangover from the COVID pandemic. I think there has been a greater focus on mental health. And when there's a greater focus on mental health, people feel more entitled to say, well, hang on a second, I am actually struggling here. And we all want people who are struggling to get the help that they need. In my case, I was absolutely terrified at the idea I might kill other people, vulnerable people, with COVID by giving them COVID. And before we had the tests, I couldn't be sure, because there was that lapse, we were told, before symptoms might kick in. I couldn't be sure I didn't have it. So I was really worried about going into the workplace, doing my radio shows, I did do them, and that I might harm others. But I took it to an extreme. And so I had to get help from mental health professionals. And that's what I did. There is clearly also an issue, I think, with long COVID. Now, that is seen as a physical condition that is recognised amongst the medical profession. But there are, I would dare to suggest, the possibility that long COVID for some is perhaps more of a mental condition than a physical condition. Doesn't mean it doesn't need to be treated, but that is a worry.
So, Esther, obviously, this is very expensive. It's also very debilitating for the people who don't work, because we know that it's a kind of self-perpetuating misery. You lack company, you lack structure, you lack money, you lack sense of self-worth. We imagine that most people would be much, much happier, more productive and cheaper for everybody else if they were in the workplace.
Well, yes. I mean, our welfare state is clearly unsustainable, and the health benefits is being reformed because we've seen this huge rise in people claiming sickness benefits, particularly after COVID. But I think that the main focus should be on what types of people are claiming benefits. So you have 700,000, people under the age of 35 claiming, sickness benefits for mental health issues, mainly depression and anxiety. Well, of course, not having a job is depressing and anxiety-inducing. And many people, particularly older people that I speak to, would say actually having a job is a way to no longer be depressed, because it gives you structure. It makes you interact with other people. You kind of you're forced to get out of your shell and have a bit more perspective. But I think this idea that the blanket phrase "are we too reliant on benefits" doesn't really contextualize the kind of country and the economy we're living in. We live in a low-wage economy. People that are on benefits of any kind, usually the transition from them going off benefits to a job doesn't really pay very well. That transition is not very is quite actually in many ways taxing.
So where are you going with this? Are you saying that benefits should be made less so that the contrast when you get back to work is more?
Our economy is not dynamic. We live in a low-wage economy. The kinds of jobs that are attractive, that are well paid enough to incentivize people to come off of benefits to actually work, just don't exist, and there are not that many of them. So there are fundamental problems with the nature of our economy. That means that the kinds of jobs that people have available are not that well paid. That's not to say that you should cut benefits necessarily, but the kinds of jobs that are available are not very well paid. That being said, clearly we have to reform sickness benefits in this country. It's the criteria for getting on them is in some ways too easy. You shouldn't have to not look for a job indefinitely because you have anxiety and depression, because finding a job could be one of those cures to your anxiety and depression. And to have mainly people under the age of 35 claiming these types of benefits. I mean, are we such a rich country that we can afford having able-bodied young people just being out of work for that long?
It's a question of whether they are able-bodied or whether they're mentally struggling or what's going on. So, Matt, the idea that, it would be much better for you if you went back to work, so go back to work. If you're actually in the grips of or the throes of proper clinical depression or real anxiety, it isn't that easy. In fact, it's not that easy to clean your teeth in the morning, is it? Doing a full-time job is a big deal.
It's a vicious cycle. I mean, if you're presenting yourself to a doctor, is the doctor going to prescribe to you work to get rid of your anxiety? It may well be, and I think it's true, that working tends to be positive for people's mental health as opposed to staying at home in a lonely state. But how do you get people in a condition where they can benefit from being back at work? I mean, when I was going through my mental health crisis, I relied to an extent to continue doing my radio shows on a maxim that I had been brought up with as a child by my father, who is, by the way, very sympathetic to my mental health. But it was when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And I think some sort of mix between that attitude where you do develop a mental resilience, but also recognising the seriousness and the realness of mental health, some sort of mix, I think, is maybe important.
Let's talk to Nigel. Nigel's on the line in Cornwall. Hello, Nigel. Good morning to you. What's your situation at the moment, sir?
Well, I'm actually off myself at the moment. I've got severe arthritis in my knees. I did have let me repeat it. I had an after knee replacement with my right knee last year, but my left knee I've got to have a full replacement, and I got a hip going as well.
Gosh, you poor thing. Let me ask you, what job did you do when you were able to work?
Well, I'll give you a list. You aren't going to believe it. When I left school at 16, I worked on the tin mines.
Right.
Then that shut. I went to Channel Tunnel for a while. I've worked on the land. I've been a gardener, industrial cleaner. Believe it or not, a life model and portrait model. I've done the lot.
Gosh, you really have, the lot. But I mean, apart from the life model bit where you probably got to lie down in a reasonably uncomfortable position, the rest of it was very physical. You were doing physical labour all of that time. So presumably the knees mean that you can't do the sort of job that you would normally do. Are you foreseeing that when you finally get to the top of the list, the NHS list, and get the other knee sorted, you will go back to work? And do you miss working?
Yeah, I do miss work, but I'm not actually on the list yet for the other knee, believe it or not.
Really? Gosh, you poor thing.
I'm 64 years old now. And believe it or not, the jobs, I still got to go to the job centre every about 3 months. And they say, we got to get you back into full-time work. But and this is going to sound a bit nasty and awful, but I know people personally who are faking it. Yeah. And they're on full disability, mobility cars, and God knows what. I honestly don't know how they do it because they haven't got the medical evidence.
From what you've heard from the people that you know who you say are faking it, is it easy to fake it, or do they have to be very wily and sly and, really full of deception to manage to fake it?
I think what it is, I know it sounds horrible, but they know how to fill these forms in. And in my opinion, I might sound a bit daft, it seems to me when you go to these so-called medicals, they're not looking at the person, they're just looking at the form.
Are there any jobs at all that you feel you physically could do, you know, a sort of job where you get to sit down and talk on a phone, perhaps, that kind of a job, or are they all out of bounds for you now, would you say?
Well, I'm sort of in a position where I can't really sit down very long, and I can't be on my feet very long either.
Oh, dear. Goodness.
But, well, I'll tell you what, some years ago, I had a phone call from the Inland Revenue. I was either 48 or 50-year-old, I can't remember. But I'd already qualified for my full pension at that age.
Because you'd worked so hard and put in so many hours.
Yeah.
Listen, I wish you well, and I'm so sorry that you're in such pain. I really appreciate the call, Nigel. Thank you very much. Let's talk to Sarah, who's in West Lothian. Hello, Sarah. So many people claiming benefit. What do you think is the situation here? Why?
It's because they get away with it. I currently have my disabled brother living with me for the past 4 months. He had a severe stroke a year ago. He has no working right-hand side, no speech.
Oh, dear.
And in the past 4 months, I have received £390.
Why?
Because of the waiting list and because the benefit system is in such a mess, I had to actually take my brother into the Department of Work and Pensions to prove how disabled he was. They then interviewed me at the house. I was awarded a appointeeship. Then I had disability payment come out to the house to make sure he was disabled, and they could see. They tried to talk to him, and he can't talk. And I'm on a 8-week waiting list now to see if I can get more money. But so far, all I have got is £390. I work full-time. I'm thinking of having to take a second job on. And I just see people claiming whatever they want, saying they're stressed, anxiety. And my brother is fully disabled at 53-year-old.
So it would seem, though, that they've been so kind of vigorous and conscientious in trying to check out the extent of your brother's disabilities, which I'm so sorry to hear are immense.
That's okay.
But you're also saying that they're not nearly as punctilious in checking other people who somehow managed to pull the wool over their eyes. So I wonder why they would be so vigorous with you and less careful with other people,
Well, I think
Sarah.
it's the criteria. That's a problem. Like if you're physically disabled, you know, it's clear for all to see. But if the criteria is, you're feeling depressed, for example, well, I mean that really. The people with physical disabilities that physically cannot work clearly should take precedence, but the system has become so clogged that you have people, unfortunately, like Sarah, who has to, you know, get a paltry sort of allowance and has to wait for ages, which doesn't really seem fair. There's also the question of, you know, actual disability in the workplace. So in France, for example, companies have to pay, if they don't have, I think, 6% of their staff having some sort of disability, they actually have to pay a sort of fine that goes into funding work for people with disabilities. We don't have something like that here. We have sort of reasonable adjustments for employers, which, you know, mainly you see people that have disabilities being employed by the likes of Sainsbury's and Tesco's because they have the resources to make those sorts of adjustments. We should actually encourage employers to create jobs, and there are various ways to do that for people with disabilities, particularly either sort of physical or mental disability. So where you can't, you know, necessarily walk or you have some mobility issues, jobs where you can sit down, take calls, for example, and all of that. We don't really have those sorts of conversations about crafting jobs for disabled people. They kind of just fall through the cracks.
On the issue of criteria, which you identify, are we saying that the doctors themselves are getting it wrong? Because it's doctors, as I understand it, who sign people off, you know, on long-term sick leave. Are we saying that doctors are not doing their jobs properly? Well, doctors
are not offering the solution. And I'm not blaming doctors necessarily. Doctors are not equipped to cure someone of depression.
No, but are we saying that they are wrongly signing people off?
I'm saying that the solution is wrong. The doctor signing off for someone having depression is one thing, but the solution isn't then to allow them to be off work indefinitely and to push people like Sarah and her brother to the bottom of the queue. That's not the solution.
Let's talk to Julie in Dorset. Hello, Julie. Thanks for ringing. Morning.
Good morning.
Hi. What's your position on this?
So I am on disability benefit.
Right.
I've got mental and physical disability. My point really I just wanted to make is that from yesterday and today on the show, I've been seeing social media blowing up, saying about people being on disability and that and how easy it is for them and everything. My point is it's not easy.
Can you talk to me a bit, Julie, about what it is like? What have you had to show or prove or, you know, provide them with so that they say, OK, you are disabled?
I have had to provide hospital letters, psychiatric letters, because I have physical and mental health problems. GP's gone past years ago. It's now hospital, has to be psychiatric, it has to be physical consultant, all that with letters and everything. I still have to go for a medical every 2 or 3 years to check my disabilities, check they're not changing. They're not changing. I'm degenerative.
Julie, when that's looming and you know you've got to go to be checked out, do you feel embarrassed, nervous, apprehensive? How do you feel about being checked?
All of the above.
All of those things.
It's very intimidating. You're told that you're going to be checked by a medical professional. They are not medical professionals, and that's been proven as well.
And tell me something, would you say that it's easy to pull the wool over their eyes, that you could fake it or pretend that you were mentally disturbed but you're not really, or you could pretend that you were physically ill and you're not really? Is it easy to do that?
I will be honest.
Yeah.
I will be honest. I know people that have. I don't know how they do it because I'm not clever enough to do it. I don't know how they do it because my experience and other friends of mine experiences have just been absolutely horrendous, and it's not been easy in the slightest.
Julie, I'm just curious to know, you were talking about social media blowing up. How upsetting do you find it as someone who is on benefits, and legitimately so, as I suspect the overwhelming majority of people in this country are? You know, of course, there are always going to be some cheats who try to con the system, but I would suggest they're in a tiny minority. How upsetting for you is it when people on benefits are stigmatised?
Extremely upsetting, because I have worked. I worked since I was 14. I'm 55 now, and I've been out of work for 7 years. I was in hospital for a year, and they saved my life. And it's really hard because a lot of my disabilities are what they call invisible illnesses, and I don't look disabled, but I am, and it's extremely hard.
You sound as if it's a really, really big strain. Listen, sending you all the love in the world and lots of best wishes. Thank you so much for calling. Let's go quickly to Annette, who's on the line in Derbyshire. Hi, Annette. Morning.
Oh, hello. Good morning.
Hi. Are you on benefit at the moment?
I'm on personal independence payment and UC, yeah.
And the conversation about that it's so many people claiming so much money, what do you make of that?
Well, I do feel, when you were talking earlier about COVID and the pandemic, supposedly, I do feel that a lot of people have suffered because of that, mentally and physically, as you were saying, as some people were saying. But I personally was injured by the vaccine, the COVID vaccine, and have cardiomyopathy, which was confirmed by my cardiologist. And I do feel that there's a lot of dishonesty within the PIP, people claiming for PIP, not people claiming. I do think I just wanted people to know that when your question about are people too reliant on sickness benefit, I think it's actually very, very difficult to get personal independent payment.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I mean, it's interesting because we've had people saying how difficult it is, but at the same time, lots of people saying that they know people who have cheated and gamed the system. So, you know.
And we can't say that those people are wrong, but it is also true, I think, that elements of the right-wing media in this country have long propagated the idea that there are benefit cheats on every street. And I think that's poisonous, I think it's offensive, and I think it's a myth.
Thank you very much indeed. Let's move on.